Terrarian in the Dungeon, Chapter 5, Fan Fiction by Azazyel. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel for listening and patreon.com/Azazyel to read all of his stories. Seshat and Sir Flufflykins the first, then made peace with one another after I and Seshat both got exhausted when running around, with me running away from my goddess with said chattering squirrel and Seshat chasing the squirrel in my arms. Maybe you did make some progress in the dungeon. Seshat panted as we were both lying face down in one of the stacked-up bedding in her sunning room. Doubtful, ugh. I groaned as I rolled onto my back and held a hand to cover my eyes from the bright light coming in from above. Well Jake, I got wonderful news for me. Seshat said cheerfully, and I looked over to my goddess as she reached into the small satchel she kept on the side of her hip, and from it she withdrew a rather formal-looking letter with what looked to be gold lettering on it. Auranas has sent out a very important message to all deities of Orario. She said to get my attention, and my eyes sharpened at such news, as no such thing had happened in my knowledge of canon, but her words kept on coming. Due to the dungeon spreading its influence not only vertically through the dimension that holds together Genkai but even horizontally, in order to prevent such spreading after the side dungeon Gnosis integrating and strengthening the main dungeon, Auranas will be focusing on suppressing the dungeon's expansion so that it doesn't open another entrance to the world. Seshat then looked at me, and her eyes carried some kind of pity, and I gulped at the sight. Therefore, with Auranas suppressing the dungeon's growth rather than lulling it into a stupor, the nascent will within the dungeon will be more aggressive, meaning more monster parties, more mutated monsters, more aberration-level monsters. And most importantly, the dungeon itself will be more active in killing people through its monster control. Seshat explained before getting into how the stronger mutated or aberrant monsters, albeit more dangerous, were actually a bit of a boon for Orario, as their monster stones were more valuable, as well as the challenge of killing the monsters will help the massive number of weak adventurers finally get stronger. That or they will die. So, do you plan to get into a party or something? The dungeon is going to be very dangerous while everyone gets used to the new changes. Seshat asked me, and I groaned as I buried my face into the pillow in denial. I am just going to make a new summon staff that can help me and some other stuff. Do we have a lot of iron and copper stored up, or do I need to go mine for some? I asked my goddess with my mind completely focused on what the hell was going on that made this world follow Danmemo's dungeon with the different forms of monsters. If this world is going to go off of Danmemo lore, does that mean Titans from Attack on Titan is going to be here? I thought somewhat hysterically before I recalled I was now an adventurer and had access to Terraria stuff. I could literally craft wings and fly away from anyone causing issues. Why in the world would you go mining for ores? This is Orario, you can just go buy whatever metal you need, and yes, I have plenty of copper and iron for some of my projects. What do you need it for? She asked after huffing at my stupid-ass question about whether I needed to go mine for it myself. I need to make a furnace and an anvil to help my crafting, then I am going to make a summon that will be very useful, I muttered, and my goddess huffed at my non-answer before giving Sir Flufflykins the first a look as though wondering I meant another semi-sentient being like his fluffiness. Once I absorbed the fact that the dungeon was going to be quite a bit more dangerous than I expected, and that I was unlikely to be able to steamroll my way through, most likely with my lower-level Terraria gear, I decided to get to work making the bread and butter in getting started in a Terraria world in the iron anvil and furnace. So in what confounded way are you going to make a furnace this time? Seshat asked me as I walked into her working area, and with a hum, I took a bunch of remnants of some marbling work and some wooden chunks from some carpentry she left behind. Wood and stone are all I need really, I said, mostly telling the truth, as I just needed to use my mana to light the wood on fire as I was assembling the stones into the furnace's shape, and unlike the damned workbench I created previously, I could easily move the stones around if they weren't in the right place, so even though it took me a couple of hours, I was able to successfully create an indestructible ever-burning furnace that melt down my scrap metal I had collected while running around. Orario. No, literally, it called all the scrap metal bits and ends I collected just scrap metal in my inventory, so thankfully it only took up one slot in the said inventory. 40 ingots of iron, some tin, and finally a tiny bit of some gold and silver, I muttered, nodding at the small haul I got through. It was nowhere near what I wanted, but, in the end, an interesting thing to note was that my ingots didn't have the same indestructible nature the other things I had created had, so I could sell these or something. Alright, I am going to try to make an anvil now, I announced, but then awkwardly noticed that as I was so absorbed in making my ever-burning furnace that Seshat had left already. Thankfully, making the anvil itself was another very easy task, as all the mental recipes had me do was make a cast out of some sand and pour the molten metal into the sand depression and then sand down the rough edges of the casted anvil. Instantly, the moment I finished the final bits of sanding, My ability considered the anvil to be good enough. I felt my mind fill with ever more crafting recipes such as the wolfram scraps and how to make the wolfram controller and other accessories that will buff the weak machine summons/weapons/tools. Alright, now to make a wolfram controller, I muttered as I cracked my neck, already honestly feeling sore from moving all the metals around and sanding down the anvil, which was a lot of work in and of itself. The wolfram controller, similar to my squirrel staff, would summon a minion to help me, but whereas Sir Flufflykins, the first, was a sentry and thus unable to move from its position, the drones the wolfram controller would summon were very much not a static turret of sorts. They were circular drones that could fly around and had laser batteries on them that could shoot small red lasers at hard enemies, as well as small sets of tools on them for picking up stuff. I am hoping I can have the drones be my supporter, but if this doesn't work, I can just keep at what I am doing until I can get another more humanoid summon to do said work. Orario had deep waters and my abilities could put a target on me that I couldn't handle just yet. I continued working on making the wolfram controller well, and throughout the entire day basically, I had to learn how to make the wolfram metal alloy that was a mix of iron and tin, and then I had to make weird circuity boards with said hunks of wolfram metal, and then finally once I assembled all the pieces of wolfram my abilities wanted, I filled up the palm-sized drone remote control with my mana to activate it and make it finished. With a loud series of beeping noises that rang out through the workshop, the head-sized flying circular drone appeared out of nowhere and began flying around me. As I took in the drone honestly, I thought I was going to hate it for being a weird thing to have in the middle of Fantasyland Damachi, but with its green tone and how emotive it was flying and making its beeping and blooping noises. What the hell is that racket, Jake Barris? Seshat yelled, stomping into the workshop, and froze seeing the flying drone flying around me, and I saw that Sir Flufflykins, the first who was riding on Seshat's shoulders, waved to the drone, and the drone responded in a series of loud beeping noises and flew up and down quickly, seemingly as a form of greeting. Fuck it. It's past 7 p.m. It's time for my fourth nap. No more banging on that damned anvil. Go get cleaned up, eat, and go to bed. I need my beauty sleep. Seshat muttered, taking Sir Flufflykins the first into her arms, and as she went down the hallway, I heard Seshat call back to me. I am keeping this squirrel as a shop alarm, by the way. She yelled, and for a moment I wanted to deny her as I wanted to snuggle his fluff, but then I shrugged as I realized I could just summon him back later on in the dungeon after I deal with the guild and talk to whoever is going to be set as my guild advisor. The next day, when I finally got Seshat to wake up, I was able to get her to update my fauna in order to see my growth with the single day in the dungeon as well as the crafting I had also done. Jake Barris. Level 1. Strength 17I. Endurance 22I. Dexterity 15I. Agility 17I. Magic 24I. Skill. The Terrarian enforces Terrarian world logic upon the user, restricts acquisition of development abilities and fauna-backed spells in order to host mods. Mods may not be taken/disabled/traded for another mod. The user's alien logic to the world prevents mental status effects from affecting the user. Development mod. Calamity and all add-ons. Allows the creation and summoning of Calamity mod objects.